In Hope and Fear We Live, Chapter 1 of the book A Seminar on Time. First, a quotation from St. Augustine's Confessions, Book 11, Chapter 4. But what in discourse do we mention more familiarly and knowingly than time? And we understand when we speak of it. We understand also when we hear of it spoken of by another. What then is time? If no one asks me, I know. If I wish to explain it to one who asketh, I know not. There are very good reasons why we should regard time as an enigma, as St. Augustine does. Time is a test case for our understanding. What we know about time is not time. If we start our investigation believing that we know what time is, our possibilities of understanding are stifled. What gets in the way is not what we know, but the beliefs we have about what we know. As St. Augustine says, we have a kind of knowledge of time, but if we try to take this out of ourselves and look at it, we find that it disappears. It is something that is in the living of our lives. Our words and concepts and all the apparatus of thinking and experience cannot take hold of this life in us. As long as we hope to pin down and define what time is, we shall end up with nothing of value. Either we will draw a blank, or worse, invent some substitute which is really just moonshine. To work at understanding, we have to ground ourselves in the state of ignorance in which we exist. Our culture encourages us to fill our minds with concepts and images in the place of real understanding. There are not only intellectual abstractions, there are also emotional pictures which trigger off satisfying emotional associations. The former are called scientific or philosophical, and the latter artistic and personal. Both are fairy gold, and both turn to ashes in the light of the morning. The feeling and direct consciousness of our human lives is the greatest instructor in the meaning of time. The problem is that we are rarely conscious of our lives. We live in shadows made of the fantasies of mind and the turbulence of emotions. Consciousness of our lives is extraordinary. To come to that, we have to go beyond thought and emotion. I have called time a test for our understanding. This is because it is there all the time. It is inescapable and applies to everything we can experience. Because it is so universal, really, in an abstract sense, as we shall see, it is cosmic, we cannot see it for what it is. It takes a very great deal for us to become aware of the air that surrounds us and to know what it is, yet air is the medium in which we exist. Time may be a deeper thing than air. We can be aware of air and even to some degree of what air does in us, but maybe we can never be aware of time. Maybe time is an illusion, as some people say. Maybe it is an absolute. Maybe it is relative. None of these words can be taken for granted. To see an illusion, we must be able to see reality. To see the relative for what it is, we need to see the absolute. If anyone wants some definition of time which pleases them, it will not be hard to find, but it will not be understanding. If only we could begin with all the aspects of time all together, all the questions, feelings, cognitions, theories, stories, sources, intuitions, experiences, attitudes, information, experiments, all as one. But we cannot do this. We have to start somewhere and go on to somewhere else. When we pass on, what we leave fades, and where we are going already conditions us in anticipation. We can have all the possible knowledge of the universe at our disposal, but we ourselves cannot experience it all at once. Experience comes in bits. The content of experience comes and goes. What comes expels what has come. This is as true of emotions as it is of thoughts. Sadness gives way to cheerfulness, and it is very rare that both are experienced together. This is part of the real problem we face. Not only the active presence of knowledge is temporary, but also the feeling, the state we're in, is fleeting. All this is obvious to everyone, but very few people take it into account when trying to understand something. Understanding cannot be got by a succession of bits of experience. Unless I myself enter into it, there is not understanding. The brain and the unconscious can be as clever as they like, but this makes no difference to my understanding. What do I understand of what my brain is doing, or the hairs of my chest, for that matter? What matters for my understanding is my own act, my own living of my life. And I want to say this in the same breath as saying, I have no idea of what I is, or even whether there is an I or not. It seems that time is against understanding. In speaking or writing or simply in feeling, we are constantly losing what we have gained. To come into a state is to lose it. To say something is to separate it from all the other things that have been said or will be said. What can possibly come out of this millstream of flotsam? Maybe it can turn the mill wheel that grinds us into the material of understanding. The ordinary vision of understanding as having a comforting mental image of something is not only incorrect, it is almost blasphemous. I shall accept the millstream of time for what it is and not pretend to some impossible timeless overview of the universe from which it is possible to pontificate on the nature of time. I am in the stream, and so are you, and so are these words. Isaac Newton taught that absolute space and time were the sensorium of God. Put in another way, they were the way in which God experienced. This is close to the Islamic view that natural laws are the habits of Allah. These are quite sensible views, if we can understand them. For that we need to understand mind, experience, God, laws. The real understanding is all at once, and it is open, not closed. We cannot get to a terminal point in understanding. We cannot get to understand half of something. So we neither finish understanding nor come to it by parts, steps, or degrees. This is what I mean by understanding being open, not closed, while having an all-or-nothing character. I will be describing what I take to be the significance of certain ancient writings. Needless to say, my descriptions are going to be terribly crude. I do not want to give an account of ancient mythologies. What is needed is to get what is said right enough in the right way to contribute something to this event of ours, a venture into the meaning of time. To get it right is a matter of understanding, and to paraphrase St. Augustine, imperfection and inaccuracy, they also serve. Some of the oldest records we have of man's feelings about himself and his destiny come from the Sumerian civilization of Gurdjieff called the Tikliamishan. As a boy living in the region which once belonged to ancient Armenia, he often heard his father singing of the hero Gilgamesh. In particular, he remembered his father reciting the story of the flood that Utnapishtim told to Gilgamesh. Many years later, just before the First World War, Gurdjieff came across the very same story, which had just been translated from a cuneiform tablet recently excavated in Mesopotamia. His father was an Ashok, a bard who belonged to an oral tradition. This tradition had evidently preserved stories for more than 2,000 years. The Sumerian and the Babylonian civilizations deeply affected Armenia and the Anatolian civilization of the Hittites. It is difficult to trace in any detail the way in which ideas were transmitted from culture to culture, but what is always left out of account is a kind of understanding of those who made use of the stories and literature. The Sumerian civilization has been recognized by Professor Samuel Kramer as highly original. It is still not very clear who the people were that drained the great marshlands of the Tigris and the Euphrates and founded the first cities. Soon after the emergence of writing in Mesopotamia 5,000 years ago, the original Sumerians were invaded by the Semitic people. We have a scarcity of literature that goes back beyond 2400 BC. But the civilization of the Sumerians that led later to the Babylonian culture that figures so largely in Gurdjieff's writings was responsible for all kinds of inventions in building, agriculture, and mathematics, as well as in the sphere of ideas. How they used ideas is not understood. The ordinary view is that these were part of a system of indoctrination that took its images from the environment and historical memories. The ideas were simply beliefs, often inculcated into people for political reasons. The objective content of these ideas is hardly ever considered. The story of Gilgamesh has been put together from numerous fragments, mostly drawing on the remains of the collection of Ashurbanipal, the late Assyrian ruler whose capital was Nineveh. Inscriptions tell us that there was an actual ruler called Gilgamesh who lived in Uruk a few generations after the flood. The flood was an event around 3000 BC when a discontinuity was experienced in the organization of human life. Certain tablets speak of the coming of the power of kingship, represented as the tiara from above after the event. It probably has nothing to do with actual flooding. In the succeeding millennia, there were several local floods that destroyed cities. Whatever the actual events, the Epic of Gilgamesh is one of the most extraordinary stories the world has ever known. It would be foolish to attempt a complete interpretation. But this can be said. The story belongs to a time when exceptional people made journeys in other worlds. These journeys were represented in stories just as they are today, only the forms of expressions are different. Today, such journeys are described in the language provided by religions. Religions as we know them did not exist 5,000 years ago. According to J.G. Bennett, the time period 3000 to 500 BC was characterized by an attitude of mind in which ordinary people looked for the meaning of their lives through exceptional semi-divine personalities. He calls it the Hemitheandric Epoch. It was the time of the pharaohs of Egypt, the priest kings of Lagash, and the great emperors of China. All of them represented as semi-divine, endowed with their power to rule from above. An understanding of this power persisted into recent times, where it appears in Christianity through the image of the halo surrounding a spiritualized man, and in Sufism as baraka, or enabling grace. In Zoroastrian times it was called farah and farano. It was probably a certain kind of substance. Gilgamesh, as the great hero, is able to do what is beyond the power of the ordinary man, but his story goes beyond heroics to an encounter with the problem of human life, death. His beloved companion, Enkidu, dies. Like the Buddha thousands of years in the future, he becomes aware that nothing in this human life is immortal. He goes into the worlds beyond death to seek an answer. Because I am afraid of death, I will go as best I can to find Upnapishtim, whom they call the Faraway, for he has entered the assembly of the gods. In a fit of rage and despair, he destroys the buckle of the boat of Urshanabi, the ferryman who can cross the ocean of death, and has to use his own energy to propel the boat. Utnapishtim gives him no solace. There is no permanence. Do we build a house to stand forever? From the days of old there is no permanence. The sleeping and the dead, how alike they are like a painted death. Gilgamesh asks him how it came about that the gods gave him immortality. And here Utnapishtim tells the story that Gurdjieff heard from his father. The gods decided to liquidate man as a failed enterprise. Only Ea, the Lord of Wisdom, has mercy. Ea whispers to Utnapishtim and tells him to build an ark and how to survive. Because Utnapishtim obeys, he is rendered deathless. There are strange pre-echoes here of Solomon and his obedience to wisdom, the creative power that dances before the Lord. Utnapishtim challenges Gilgamesh to stay awake for 6 days and 7 nights, but Gilgamesh does not have this strength and is even unaware that he fails. Incidentally, this is a direct teaching on the nature of consciousness in man. Man does not have consciousness. Once a woman said to Gurdjieff that she had a state of unbroken awareness for 15 minutes. He said, "Impossible. Not even Mother of God capable." True consciousness is beyond life and therefore beyond death. Out of compassion, Utnapishtim tells Gilgamesh of a plant under the water that can restore youth. The old men are young again. Gilgamesh takes the plant, but while bathing in a pool, a serpent comes and takes the flower. Immediately it sloughs its skin and disappears into the pool. Obviously, all this is talking about self-renewal. Gilgamesh laments, "I found a sign and now have lost it." I believe this sign to be the principle that Gurdjieff constantly referred to in All and Everything in his cosmology of reciprocal maintenance, and in the meaning of the name of one of the most sacred characters, Ashyatya Shimash. It is the whole question of how the creation renews itself, the secret that every man has to find in order to be immortal. Gilgamesh returns to Uruk, worn out with labor, and inscribes his story on a stone. Enlil, the god, tells him that his destiny is to rule, not to gain everlasting life. During his search for immortality, Gilgamesh meets Siduri, the woman of the vine, the maker of wine. She tells him, "When the gods created man, they allotted to him death, but life they retained in their own keeping. As for you, Gilgamesh, fill your belly with good things, day and night, night and day, dance and be merry, feast and rejoice. Let your clothes be fresh, bathe yourself in water, cherish the little child that holds your hand, and make your wife happy in your embrace. For this too is the lot of man. The terror and despair of Gilgamesh belongs to us. But we must remember the point made by Gurdjieff. It is made at the climax of all and everything. That is illustrated by one of Idris Shah's stories. Someone asked Uwais about his condition. He replies, "When I wake up, I know that I could be dead before the day is out." His interlocutor objects that this is the condition of every man. But, Uwais replies, how many people are aware of it? The fear of death is only part of the awareness of death, but it is probably a major factor in beginning to understand time. If death is not serious for us, then we are probably in a state of dream. I know that a clear and sudden awareness of death had a critical effect on my future life. The Sumerian material and its transformations in Babylon thousands of years later could well have provided the background for the researchers of the Salmoon Society that Gurdjieff often refers to as the group that preserved real understanding of the purpose of human life. One of the major pieces of literature of Babylonian times was the creation epic, Enuma Elish, When on High. I can only give the barest impression of this stupendous work. It is very important for understanding the background of ideas we are plunging into. In the beginning, there is a state of chaos. Tiamat, the bitter waters of the ocean, and Apsu, the sweet waters of the abyss, are mingled together, and with them is Mumu, mist. Here is a statement of the primal triad in a state of unconditioned being in which spirit, Apsu, and matter, Tiamat, are not distinguished. Then the gods are named. That means there is a step of conditioning. After Lamu and Lahamu come Ansha and Kisha. Shah means horizon, An above and Ki below. This is the division between higher and lower, and man is also the name of heaven and Ki of earth. Then come other differentiations, including the creation of Ea, the Lord of Wisdom. In the later work done in the Old Testament, Genesis, creation is represented in terms of partition and blending. In the Enuma Elish there is partition or separation of the elements, but the recombination is represented in terms of struggle, in which the world situation is drastically changed. The gods make such a commotion that Apsu goes to Tiamat and urges their destruction. Tiamat will not hear of this, but Apsu and the Wazir Mumu plot to destroy the gods. Ea comes to the rescue and subdues Apsu and Mumu. He kills Apsu after casting a spell on him. I interpret this to mean that there is a barrier between the unconditioned and the conditioned. Later, Tiamat and some of the gods again find the condition intolerable, and Tiamat prepares to destroy the creation. She becomes a source of monsters. The gods are terrified, and this time Marduk, the son of Ea, assumes the task of fighting Tiamat in exchange for absolute authority. He overcomes her and divides her into two to form the fabric of the heavens and the substance of the earth. This is the ordered world of existence. Tiamat has a consort, Kingu. His fate is to provide material for the fashioning of Lulu, or man. It is from the blood of Kingu that man is made. Therefore, there is something of the gods in him. But Marduk says, "Yes, I will create Lulu, man. Upon him shall the services of the gods be imposed, that they may be at rest." This is the incredible proposition. Man is an instrument in involuntary service to the gods, usually called the Anunnaki. He is a sort of kitchen boy of the universe. As Gurdjieff was to say, man serves the purpose of great nature willy-nilly. From another creation account, part of a birth incantation, we read, "Create man that he may bear the yoke." From a Babylonian tablet containing a ritual for the restoration of a temple, he, Anu the sky god in this case, created mankind for the doing of the services of the gods. And there are many references to sacrificial offerings and the performance of rites and ceremonies. Offerings and ceremonies, I believe, signify the release of energies. In another tablet, which ends with the words, "Let the wise teach the mystery to the wise," the inscription is more subtle. Man is depicted as the creation of the Anunnaki. His role is to maintain order on the earth and, day and night, to celebrate the festivals of the gods. There are some extraordinary hints here about the background of Gurdjieff's ideas. Man has to work. This is largely represented as an imposition concerning which he has no choice. The objective is the maintenance of order. Man, by providing order on the earth and worshipping the gods, provides something that enables the gods, the Anunnaki, to rest. In All and Everything, Gurdjieff describes how there is an inevitable tension between the requirements for order and the higher principle of compassion. Order is the responsibility of what Bennett was later to term demiurgic intelligence. In Sumerian times, the Anunnaki. These intelligences, though higher in the scale than man, are yet limited and fallible. Gurdjieff says that a possible threat of disorder led the higher intelligence to implant the organ Kundabhava, which prevented man from seeing reality. He then saw reality upside down. Later, when the threat passed and the organ was removed, man has somehow acquired the habit of blindness and perpetrated an insane attitude towards his life. Yet, willy-nilly he serves, and things adjust so that he provides the energy required consciously or unconsciously. Seeing reality upside down may be in part a reference to the fact that it is impossible for the mind to represent spiritual reality. Hence, the tradition was advocated by René Guénon, for example, that spiritual teachings represent reality by way of inverse analogy. The Enuma Elish typifies this, for example, in representing the conquest of Apsu and Tiamat by their progeny. It also means that when man wakes up to his situation, he must become aware of the inevitable need to labor. His task is then to find out how to do this in such a way that he can gain immortality for himself. This corresponds to a higher aim than the maintenance of order. It is represented in all the teachings of the age of revelation from Buddha to Muhammad. Above all, however, the upside-downness of man's perceptions means that he can hardly be aware at all of the reality of his own death, which Goethe says is the only way he can become free of egoism. As he is, man is a sheep, looked after for the sake of his mutton and wool by a magician. The way out of the situation in the Hemitheandric Epoch was through the mysteries for the few and through the divine leader for the many. At the end of this epoch, the Old Testament speaks of the special few who after death would be gathered into the bosom of the fathers, who included Abraham. Abraham is associated with the extraordinary and enigmatic figure of Melchizedek of Lagash. There are both pessimistic and optimistic views of life after death, usually presented to persuade the majority to adhere to moral principles. When it was optimistic, as in many of the Egyptian writings, it was nothing but a presentation of the paradise of the inner spirit world. This world is free of the constraints of space and time, but it is not the spiritual reality. Only in the latter revelations were there declared the reality beyond paradise, which is really the place of union between man and his source. To come to a realization of the spiritual reality, man had probably to be released from feeling himself the lackey of superior forces. By and large, these superior forces, such as the Anunnaki in Mesopotamia and the Neter in Egypt, were the sole creatures of immortality. To come to a realization of the spiritual reality, man had probably to be released from feeling himself the lackey of superior forces. By and large, these superior forces, such as the Anunnaki in Mesopotamia and the Neter in Egypt, were the sole creatures of immortality. According to Rudolf Steiner, man was made insensitive to the great presences of the spirit world so that he could develop his own individual powers. This brings us into what Bennett called the Megalothropic Epoch, which extended roughly from the time of Buddha to the last century. The opening up of the sense of individual human power, which led to human self-aggrandizement and technology on a vast scale, was a visible counterpart to the inner message that the true individuality of every man was godlike. Goethe emphasizes the Christian form of this when he says, "We are all equally children of the common Father. The Father is beyond the gods." What opened up with Buddha and to a lesser degree with Socrates and other extraordinary figures of the time around 600 BC was a radically new attitude to the world. The world was something to be understood. Let me make this clear. It is a matter of the individual directly contemplating the world in which he exists and asking, what kind of world is this? What is possible in it? And what is impossible? Buddha can be said to have inaugurated vast study programs. Buddha can be said to have inaugurated vast study programs into the nature of existence itself. There came the great pronouncements. Impermanent are all component things. Everything that comes into existence also passes away. Even the gods, insofar as they exist, which Buddha did not deny, are perishable. The spirit world, the world of the heavens and the hells, is not an abode of the imperishable. What has to be done is to go beyond time. Time is the representative of the conditions under which we exist, not only as bodies, Time is the representative of the conditions under which we exist, not only as bodies, but also as minds. Early, lately, we are bound to disintegrate. This raises the question, is there anything in us which will not disintegrate? Buddha refused to answer this question directly. The mind is unable to see what is involved because it belongs to the perishable. Religion was to teach that the imperishable in man was that which came directly from God. It then got itself into an endless muddles, giving an image of what this could be. The Sufis were to say, that which does not perish is that which does not dream. It is possible that the promise of religion in Buddhism, Judaism, Christianity, Zoroastrianism and Islam was not fulfilled. People still talked of life after death, which, though valid enough after we have discovered what after means in this context, misses the point. When the Megalothropic Epoch finally eroded man's sensitivity to the spirit world, the place of the life after death, his hopes of paradise and heaven were eroded too, and he was left with a worldview imprinted with a sense of impermanence and extinction. Needless to say, he invented all sorts of ways to eat, drink, and be merry, including all sorts of mental masturbations in art, politics, and philosophy. The search for immortality is linked to the search for meaning. I remember the agnostic astronomer Fred Hoyle writing that the idea of immortality did not appeal to him because he could stand living as he was for about only 300 years. This is a crude version of immortality as something static. The problem in getting beyond this is that the immortal seems to us as changeless and thus utterly boring, unless the changeless is at the very peak of our experience. This is the attitude in the immortality claims of art and romantic love. It was this that Shakespeare brought to a high level of expression that served also to transform the use of English. Sonnet 67. Since brass, nor stone, nor earth, nor boundless sea, but sad mortality o'ersways their power, how with this rage shall beauty hold a plea, whose action is no stronger than the flower? Oh, how shall summer's honey breath hold out against the wreckful siege of battering days, when rocks impregnable are not so stout, nor gates of steel so strong, but time decays? O fearful meditation, where, alack, should time's best jewel from time's chest lie hid? Or what strong hand can hold his swift foot back? Or who his spoil of beauty can forbid? Oh, none, unless this miracle have might, that in black ink my love may still shine bright. Here, the symbol of black ink is that of the action stronger than time. The moments of meaning, a state of love, a work of art, a breath of summer, are ephemeral, and we lose them. I wrote her name upon the sand, came the waves and washed it away. The whole of the sonnets is concerned with time. Probably not until the 4 quartets of T.S. Eliot was there anything of an equivalent level of insight. Anything that we can have as an experience is subject to interaction. What is completely outside this world is completely outside our experience. This means that as far as we are, This means that as we are, we cannot know the immortal. The fear of death when it did not lead to resignation, fatalism, as it turned to in the East, energized all kinds of enterprise. Voltaire said, "If God did not exist, man would have to invent him." This is really what he did. Man spent thousands of years inventing God, because he could not accept what had been revealed from above. In Europe, perhaps a few great figures such as Dante and Leonardo da Vinci understood the situation. Leonardo wrote in his diaries, "I thought that I had been preparing for life, but now I see that I am preparing for death." On the side of studies of the physical universe, the notion of time as a condition of dissolution reached a climax in the 19th century. In 1854, Lord Kelvin declared the inevitable heat death of the whole universe. Whatever the organization of matter, it must in the end disintegrate into a state of disorder. This was almost an exact replica of Buddha's declaration of more than 2,000 years before. We can believe that present science has a different view, but what this view is, nobody has convincingly declared. Different people latch onto different pieces of science to make their interpretations. One thing that is interesting, however, is how astrophysics has destroyed even the notion of the permanence of atoms, to which Lord Kelvin's contemporaries, I believe he was agnostic about atoms, were rigid in adherence. There is even talk in the Big Bang theory of the Hadron Horizon, a time period 10 to the minus 23 seconds after the creation of the universe, when the fundamental particles were formed. This was quite a different stage from the creation of the elements, which is attributed largely to stellar transformations. For fun, we can call the atomic and fundamental particles the scientific equivalent of the gods, which is really what they were, and say that modern astrophysics has done a Buddha on them. They are real enough, but not the essential thing. The essential thing is hidden in the Big Bang or somewhere inside a black hole. Instinctively, many scientists felt that something was missing from thermodynamics and the view that everything is running down. There was, after all, the evolutionary evidence of things running up the scale of organization. No matter how much this was labeled a temporary fluctuation, it had to be accounted for. The great scientist Charles Maxwell stepped in and described an imaginary device for the creation of order, which became known as Maxwell's demon. Maxwell was responsible for the discovery of the electromagnetic character of light, and he had a very extraordinary intuition. His demon worked in the following way. We have to imagine a box containing gas and a partition dividing the box into two halves, which we will simply call left and right. A gas in equilibrium is made of molecules moving about, bouncing off walls and occasionally each other. Roughly speaking, the faster the average speed of the molecules, the hotter the gas. Now, in the dividing partition, there is a demon perched by a little shutter. The demon is able to detect the speed of the molecules. When he sees a fast one coming from the left, he lets it through, and when he sees a slow one coming from the right, he lets it through. The net result is that the right side gets hotter and the left cooler. With this arrangement, it is possible to drive a heat engine and get work out of the system. The energy has not been created, it has been organized. As people rush to point out, the demon, if he actually does anything, must expend energy, and the way in which he does this is bound to use up the energy made available by his enterprising activities and more. You can't cheat the system. Whatever we do can only make the situation worse. The objection is valid, but probably misses the clue which is hidden in Maxwell's ingenious model, which appears to do very little, may dramatically change. What appears to do very little may radically change the organization of the system. This is the principle of catalysis, where structures facilitate the formation of complex molecules. It may be one of the keys to understanding evolution, though we must remember that besides smallness, Maxwell's demon has the property of intelligence. In human life, the message is pretty clear. If you try to create order by massive effort, you are a fool. Everything that is done creates disorder in its wake. No activity subject to time can get us out of time. We can imagine our own experience as a kind of gas and picture to ourselves the separation of the quick and the slow. This is the intelligence in us. This may be the way to overcoming time. Raj had this intuition, but he put it in a rather misleading way. Time is the most important thing next to awareness. The flow of time through us gives us an opportunity to extract what we can. Time is a threefold stream. What we catch is ours, but what we don't is gone. Time does not wait for us to catch everything in the stream, but if we catch enough, we shall have enough to form higher bodies, and thereby become enduring. What is misleading in this picture is that this picture of time as a flow external to us. This is just a belief element that gets in the way. If we try to build on it, we will be doing worse than building castles in Spain. Yet the intuition is there. We have to be patient with our minds and their habits, but there is no need to indulge in pictures. We can come to understand if we bring ourselves to be true to what we know. Besides the time of fear, there is the time of hope. Jesus taught that amongst those who were with him, there were some who would not taste death before the coming of the kingdom of heaven. In the revelations of St. John the Divine, an angel appears who declares that there shall be time no longer. In the Hadith of Muhammad, God speaks of the day of resurrection when even the body will be restored, and all will come to the final judgment through which the worthy will find Allah. These teachings inspired the most intense hope. The early Christians waited for the end of the world and the coming again of Christ in glory. After centuries of disillusionment and compromise, the message of Revelations inspired innumerable cults of the millennium in medieval Europe. Mystics such as the 14th century anchorite Julian of Norwich, in the Revelations of Divine Love, spoke of an ultimate fulfillment. And all shall be well, and all manner of things shall be well. We ourselves know that we need to hope, and that if we cease to hope, life is meaningless and even hellish. If we do not persistently align ourselves to tomorrow, our lives fall apart. It is the hope of the life to come that has supported countless human beings in their strivings to live well, but it is not only a matter of a reward system. If we are good, we will get to heaven. It is far more complex than that. There is a need we have for tomorrow to be in some way different from yesterday. This is a hunger for new impressions based on the hardly thought-out realization that we cannot come to understand the world and our situation in it without experiences coming to us that we cannot engineer for ourselves. It is connected with all the beliefs we have that there is somehow or other, somewhere or other, a real wisdom which knows where things are going and what to do with our lives. People have invented all sorts of pictures about God or spirit powers or historical forces because of the endemic disease of having to produce something in which to believe. But the feelings we have about tomorrow are very direct. If it is totally unknown, it is liable to plunge us into anarchy and fear. If it is predictable, it is liable to drag us into depressive states. Hope means that something can happen tomorrow that can get us somewhere, that something will be nearer achieved, that new awareness of life will open up, that problems will be resolved. All this is so obvious, but we do not understand it. If we understood it, we would be in a position to understand the teachings of Jesus and the revelations of St. John. The extreme form of hope on the historical scale is messianism. A Savior will come. According to Bennett, this image originated with the Savior God culture of the Indo-Europeans and came first to expression in the teaching of Zoroaster in the notion of the Seoshians. One will come who will set us free. Free from what? From political oppression, from poverty, from sin, from blindness. All these are common attitudes. I will suggest that behind them all is the hope of release from conditioning. We must realize that this release is not something that can be done by one person to another. It is this crucial point that is usually missed, and as a consequence, what a Messiah can do is totally misunderstood. This was a situation of the politically minded Jewish zealots in the time of Jesus. The image of some great future event has been with us for at least 2,000 years, and it has had a profound effect. It has entered into the cult of progress that increasingly dominated European thinking before this century. Whether the context is technological, religious, or political, the significant aspect is the state of mind of living in expectation. The state of expectation we are in has had an effect on our lives, how we deal with experiences or relate ourselves to them. The form of expectation is the form of our efforts. If we expect the world to end tomorrow, we're going to do such things as get blind drunk or repent of our sins. When we go outside the sphere of natural events, such as the destruction of cities or planets, and also leave behind the carrot phenomenon of expecting some future reward for good behavior in the past, the situation becomes very hazy. The day of resurrection is a good example. There will be a day when all mankind will be resurrected and come to judgment. It is easy to criticize the notion that each person's body is to be reassembled by divine fiat, and there is a mode of explanation in which it is said that this really refers to some inner body. Really, this argument in itself is limited. It presupposes that what is being talked about belongs to some succession of events analogous to those we experience in this life. Let us turn it around. The day of resurrection is to come, simply because mankind has not got there. I mean to add the following. The imposition of ordinary ideas about succession make us believe that the creation of the world was in the past. This is probably quite mistaken. Many people, for example, have had the intuition that the creation began with Christ, and so to say proceeded both backwards into the past and forwards into the future from the time of Christ. Similar descriptions have been given, centered on Muhammad. That mankind has not reached the day of resurrection is much the same as the fact that mankind has forgotten how itself had originated. In Sufism, this condition of mankind is called nasut, humanity from the word insan, man. It is talked about in contrast to the divine world, lakut, from ilahi, divinity. The day of resurrection and the creation of souls are the same kind of event. and they cannot be described in the language suitable for material processes. They have to do with the world of the imperishable. The day of resurrection is no more, but no less, impossible to understand than how a spiritual reality can be welded to a physical body to create man. Further, the Quran is full of references to the omnipotence of God's will, even to the point of suggesting that the unbeliever has been led to unbelief by Allah. Yet for this the unbeliever shall be judged and purged. This makes no sense other than as the portrayal of human life as a meaningless puppet show, unless we understand that all decisions come from will, and will is God. Rumi understood this better in the Masnavi, after giving a story containing a long dialogue between an advocate of free will and a compulsionist. He adds that the argument will not be resolved until the day of judgment, and what is needed is love to dissolve our perplexity. The day of resurrection and judgment is the day of will. If this is a real event, it is an event of a totally different character from those we believe or know. I must add that it is also different from events to do with life after death. Perhaps we will be able to come to some real understanding of another life and theories of reincarnation during our investigation. But all the great religions distinguish this sphere from the coming face to face with God. If only we had a language that did not carry with it all the clutter of unintelligent associations that have assembled around such words as God and life after death. Really, we have no idea what these things mean. The way to get to an understanding about these things is illustrated by one of the stories that Idris Shah has collected. A country bumpkin goes to a city and is utterly bewildered by the impact of so many people and so much activity. His sense is real, and he wonders how he is going to identify himself when he wakes up the next day. He hits upon the idea of tying a balloon to his foot and goes to sleep with peace of mind. A practical joker removes the balloon, however, and ties it to his own foot. In the morning, the yokel wakes to find the situation. Seizing hold of the joker, he yells, "If you are me, then who am I?" The problem with philosophy is that it is a specialized activity and ends up with philosophy talking only to philosophers. Philosophers produce words about such things as identity and omit the practical side of learning how to hear the identity of a melody, for example, or to see what happens in their own changes of state. Philosophers, like most people, imagine that they are in contact with their experience. I do not know whether we can avoid such an illusion in ourselves. I speak about hope and fear, but am I in contact with that when I speak? We can study the material of ancient level. We can study the material of ancient legends of ancient... God. We can study the material of ancient legends, of sacred books, or of modern science, but are we really in touch with what is being said? There's no certainty at all in this business, but one thing we can hope for, to open up something unexpected. Already unusual things are appearing in our exploration, and already we need to let ourselves assimilate the material without interference from belief. Goethe's teachings on creation and time are some of the most difficult materials with which to grapple, But we are capable of absorbing more than we believe once we can bring ourselves to abandon rigid mental images and slavish emotional associations. Throughout all and everything there is a teaching on the realm of the imperishable or on higher worlds. It is not surprising that time appears as a major protagonist in the cosmic drama, almost personified as the merciless Heropas. In a beautifully comic version of the second law of thermodynamics, Gurdjieff describes how God came to realize that the place of his dwelling, the Holy Sun Absolute, is almost imperceptibly but inevitably decreasing in volume. This, according to Gurdjieff, is the background of the creation, something prior to the creative act. What on earth is he talking about? According to J.G. Bennett, he is saying that time destroys possibilities. If anything is started, it must inevitably become more and more conditioned until it is completely determined and fixed. This is a statement about the conditions which the creative act cannot This is a statement about the conditions which the creative act cannot annihilate, but must somehow get around. If we look at the creation from the other side, for example, of human beings attaining immortality or evolving, then similar considerations apply. What is it that, through experience associated with time, can escape the ravages of time? It is all very fine to say that man does not have to build a soul, that all he needs to do is divest himself of the veils of illusion, including the illusion of time. But what on earth is an illusion, and how is it so effective? Gurdjieff's account of the creation describes how his endlessness manages to create a truly independent world, which, by its striving to return to him, the source, provides a counterbalance to the destructive consequences of time. This is an astonishing version of the religious view of God as love, and the notion that God created the world in order to love himself. If we assimilate what Gurdjieff is saying, we can begin to see, firstly, that love is not a sentiment, but the very source of the creation, and secondly, that love itself is not the ultimate reality. The ultimate is beyond God. J.G. Bennett many times has referred to the Zoroastrian teaching on Zervan, absolute time, as the origin of Gurdjieff's Heropas. Zervan is even once represented as a source of both Ahura Mazda, the good spirit, and Ahriman, the spirit of the lie. The good spirit, his endlessness in Gurdjieff's all and everything, does not have absolute power. There is something beyond love, the merciless, within which God, will, and love have to operate. Many people have puzzled over this cosmology and wondered how it can possibly be asserted that time is prior to God. There's something tremendous here. If we look at our experiencing, if we can bring ourselves to be able to do this, which is Gurdjieff's contemplation, we can see that time enters as the force of evacuation. Locke, in his phrase, time is a perpetual perishing, got very close. Time means that we lose whatever we gain. It is the taste of nothingness in us. We cannot be anything in time. This is not because time is simply a condition of matter, as taught in ancient philosophies. It is a condition of reality. The exercise of will requires existence, and existence requires time. To do anything, there has to be the risk of conditioning, illusion, and death, Otherwise there is no doing. The image of God is the image we have of real doing. We end this first exploration with some of Gurdjieff's own words. Time itself no being can understand by reason or sense or by any other inner being function. It cannot even be sensed by any gradation of instinct which arises and is present in every more or less independent cosmic concentration. It does not issue from anything, but blends always with everything and becomes self-sufficiently independent. Therefore, in the whole of the universe, it alone can be called and extolled as the ideally unique subjective phenomenon.